Thanks for the organizers for putting together or arranging this wonderful seminar. And thank you to all that you've been hanging on this late for this afternoon. I was asked to talk about regulation. I should first say that my background is in media and cultural studies. So it's not regulation, it's not surveillance or privacy as such. I sort of coming into this area by first doing research on public participation, journalism, digital journalism, and then it sort of expands into research on the media environment or digital environment in very broad sense. And this brings me to questions of surveillance and privacy in particular. But it sort of leaves regulation a little bit out of my expertise. So in this sense, my perspective may be a little bit different from Rasmus and Charles, but I hope you don't mind. I think it's good to have sort of different perspectives to that. First, I would like to, as good academics do, they explain the concepts that they use. Here are the ideas that what I mean by surveillance, regulation, and privacy in this presentation. First, even though we need to be critical of surveillance and particularly the new directions that it is taking, not because it's evil or it is bad, but it's something that we don't know exactly what sort of development will entail in that. But at the same time, it is fair to say that many things that surveillance is connected to are really good and beneficial for society. It doesn't only relate to police and military. It also has something to do with banking or allocating social benefits to the right people. So in that sense, surveillance is not bad. But the problem is that it may be becoming banal. Yeah. And that's kind of a problem. And there are two things that's what I mean by banal surveillance. One is that institutions and experts who are doing the surveillance are quite distant to us. And in many sense, they are also inaccessible for us, even for researchers or policymakers who want to learn that what surveillance institutions are doing. At the same time, we know that as objects of potential surveillance, it's something that we can't simply escape. It's something which is going to be imposed on us in any case. So why bother? And that's the problem with banal surveillance, that I think that these both aspects should be somehow open to discussion and find some kind of like dialogue between these two areas, the surveillance institutions and citizens and users. Then about regulation, I think that regulation is absolutely necessary. That's the reason why, in general, police is trustworthy, military are not doing very bad things, banks are not deceiving us, because they are regulated and they are also held accountable of their deeds. So in that sense, we need regulation, and when the landscape of surveillance is changing, we need updated legislation. But I think it's not a panacea that too much attention or exclusive attention to regulation runs the risk of missing the point that we also need to see beyond regulation. Then the third point is privacy. What I try to think or suggest to you is that we should probably not take the sort of a natural order of thinking that it's surveillance first, and then we try to discuss or find out what does it do to privacy. So the order is from surveillance to privacy. I think privacy deserves more attention and more effort to understand that what privacy means independently or separately from surveillance. This is something I come at the end of my talk here. Then, when I say that regulation is not enough, or regulation is not panacea for problems or questions of legitimacy of surveillance, I don't mean that regulators are doing any bad things. Kari, please take my word here. But I want to understand that what makes the work of regulators and policymakers difficult. And here's a picture of Finnish football, which shows that why Germany and Sweden now are top in football and Finland is not. But this also operates as a metaphor of regulators' job in terms of in relation to surveillance. First side of the metaphor is obviously that it's about politics, it's about game, it's about negotiating and drawing compromises, and it's difficult. But the more important part of the metaphor is the ground. That it's very shaky, and every step you take is difficult. And when it's game or it is football, there are lots of steps that you need to take, and you need to take them fast. But it's bloody awful, and it's very tedious. It's irritating. It makes you angry. So this is the kind of a mentality of regulators or policymakers' position in relation to surveillance. And it's also a very difficult thing to manage. The ball in the game is always on the other side of the pitch. It means that it's not only a question about state surveillance or hard surveillance, it's also about soft surveillance, which is operated by market actors or many other actors. And it's something which regulators are supposed to manage and cover at the same time. That's very difficult. Then there's a question of efficacy of surveillance. And this is ultimately, or you can argue that it's something that you can never verify, that surveillance works. Part of the question, part of the explanation is that intelligence agencies or security firms or banks or health systems are not supposed to tell what they find out by surveillance, because they are restricted by the law. It's something which is unverifiable. Sorry, difficult word for me. And then the third point is that the pitch, unfortunately, is expanding all the time, because surveillance is being commodified. It's something which Anton was referring to, this widget spin, which is kind of a toy or capacity or competence that many institutions and actors have now, and they want to play with it. That's why the pitch of surveillance is expanding all the time, which makes regulation more and more difficult. And then this is time where we need to stop that. And this goes back to a question that I raised earlier, that what sort of priorities should we have in this moment, because this is so unbearably difficult and tedious. And I think that I come from Nordic countries, and Netherlands is very same as Nordic countries, that we tend to have relatively high trust in state and public authorities. And in that sense, I think that we may be more maybe we may rely on public institutions and political institutions, that they will do they will do their best in dealing with hard surveillance and state surveillance. But soft surveillance is more difficult and more tricky. I would put more focus on that. And it means that there should be a regulation of innovation, because this is the area where the surveillance is expanding, and it's becoming, it is getting forms which, at least to me, seem a bit strange. And here's the example that I was briefly referring earlier, is that here's a chart which is used or the example of the replica of the chart that they use in media organizations. It's an attempt to map their users and audiences. And it is based on systematic online monitoring of their users. And this is no news, that this is how news organizations, media organizations, they monitor the behavior of their users all the time. And it's not news that this behavioral data is also an item of exchange. It's been sold and resold to other parties. What came as a surprise to me was that just a few months ago I heard, just unofficially, that two researchers from an American university visited the New York Times, and they found out that on that particular day, the New York Times had resold the user data to 44 third parties. So the scale is really staggering. And the question is that what do policymakers or regulators do with this situation? And in the US, the answer is they do nothing. In fact, the US Congress had the opportunity to restrict or regulate the reselling markets of user data without users' permission, and they chose not to do anything. And the reason why they did this, I think two reasons are probable. One is that news business is so in a bad shape in the US that it's very difficult to do anything that would undermine their economic well-being. And the other explanation is that it may be possible to think that this has nothing to do with privacy, because no one's identity will be or would be revealed to these third parties. It's not about identities of particular persons. It's about anonymous groups. But my argument is that it is about privacy, because anonymity is also a part of privacy. It's something, when we use media, we do it privately. And when that data is aggregated and resold to advertisers and others, it will be fed back to us. And it will be fed back to us with peculiar theories about what we want. And there are lots of people who have done audience research on what people think about news. And the sort of basic response is that they are really pissed off that's a bad word. They're really aggravated by what media organizations are doing for them. So this is kind of a practice which is in many ways problematic. My second example was already discussed here earlier. It's the Gator machine, so I don't have to go into detail. But the sort of the main question is that if this is a field of innovation, the question is, and this is a question of accountability, someone should ask, and someone deserves to have an answer, why was this done? And the answer that because we can, there's no particular reason, there's no attempt to discriminate gay people, but the ultimate consequence is most likely going to be one. And this is also a problem for policymakers and regulators if they say that we shouldn't have like this. We should sort of in advance restrict possibilities for algorithms like this. And this is very against of economic policies at the moment, where so much hopes are invested in big data and algorithms. If politicians would oppose that, they would certainly not be re-elected, or probably not so. So I would sort of put more focus on this field of innovation than the field of state surveillance or police surveillance. They are important and they need to be scrutinized, but I think this is far more important and far more ambiguous. And I think it's the idea that we should sort of impose ethics, questions of ethics or questions of accountability to this area might work better than regulation as such. And by accountability, I mean exactly the same things as what Charles Schwab said earlier, that it's not about liability, not so much about liability, it's about answerability. That we should sort of get the technology business to answer to these questions, what they are doing. And I think that I would assume that many people who are in the algorithmic business or technology startups would agree that Gator machine was not that good idea. Or it wouldn't have been a good idea if it would be in the hands of, in wrong hands, totalitarian governments or so. Then my final point, and this is something which I've been thinking about more than the others, and this is the question that what is privacy? And I think it's probably too abstract to just say that privacy is a constitutional right, or that privacy is a realm opposed to public realm. Those notions are correct, of course, but I think they don't go far enough. So instead, we should sort of start to think about, and this is my suggestion, that maybe we have 4 set of practices where privacy matters to people. So then we should ask that, what do we think of dignity? Why dignity? What does it mean for us? And who is harming our dignity? And when we are asking that question from ourselves, we very soon become aware that it means different things for different people. And this is why I've been sort of planning a research where I should ask this kind of question of people who are in one or other reason privacy vulnerable, for whom dignity matters more than average people or ordinary citizens. And it's the same question about retreat. Why do people want to be on their own? Well, as a Finn, I know very well, because this is what we do. This is our sort of the main hobby, is to be on our own. But it means different things for and I don't only mean nationalities, but like very, very concretely, it means different things for different people. And then we can ask that, who is preventing us to be in retreat? And how does technology come to it? So it's more like a very practical question. And same goes with anonymity, because I think anonymity is also very important. It's lovely to walk in the streets of Rotterdam where I know that nobody knows me, even though they see me. And it's the same with charity or voting, things that we do anonymously. And if that is somehow jeopardized, it will have consequences. And it's not only about me, it's about maybe we should think about privacy not only in terms of my experience, but experience of other people. And the question for back to the regulation is that I'm afraid that regulators and policymakers do not have time to think about this, or they don't have time to find out, because this seems like a very good reason for a long study. So I would welcome funding very much, but it's something that regulators and policymakers are not. They don't have the luxury to wait and think about. And in this sense, I think that it would be one way where researchers, academic research, might help not just people but also regulators and policymakers, if we are able to find out more practical definitions for not for the concept of privacy, but sort of a constituent. What constitutes privacy in like several different parts. Thank you.
Thank you.